Okay, this is General Biology, Lecture 1, Part 2, the second half of the lecture. Now we're going to talk about the science of biology. We've kind of covered science and how to make a fair test, but what about the word biology? What does that mean? Well, biology is the study of living organisms and how they interact with one another, how they interact with their environments, which means that the scope of biological study is very big. There's a lot of things that a biologist can study. They can study everything from submicroscopic molecules and cells to whole ecosystems and even the whole planet. So, if we're going to talk about how living things interact and how living things work, if we're going to study living things, then we kind of have to define what life is. This is a biology class. We're going to study life, but what is life? How do we determine if something is alive? Well, all living things share 7 key characteristics. Now, it depends on the textbook how many characteristics are used. I think the one that we're using now uses 7. So let's go ahead and look at them. The first thing is order. O-R-D-E-R. Order. All living things are organized or ordered. They're coordinated in structures that consist of one or more cells, right? Here is a picture of E. coli bacteria. I think I took this from Wikipedia. This is a picture of I don't know, a frog or a toad or something. They're very highly ordered. Even these E. coli, if we looked inside them, we'd see that there are certain processes that occur in certain places, just like with this frog. And so if we're going to talk about living things and how they're ordered, one thing to note is that they're consisting of at least one or more ordered cells. If it's made up of just one cell, the organism is what we call unicellular. A living organism made up of just one cell, unicellular, the E. coli bacteria here. Each one of these is a separate organism. A multicellular organism is a living organism made up of many cells. This frog, a human, a tree, a mushroom, etc. 2, the second thing that a living thing must have is a sensitivity or response to some kind of stimulus. Living things respond to all kinds of different diverse stimuli. You can click on this link here and watch a plant responding to light stimuli. Plants will open or move in response to light. Bacteria can move toward or away from different things. Like, for example, if this is a bacteria here and there's some sugar over here, the bacteria can actually move towards the food. Not all bacteria can do this, but this bacteria can. So that's a sensitivity to stimuli. Number 3, the third thing that all living things need is the ability to reproduce. Living things reproduce. It's as simple as that. Every living thing is capable of passing its genes, passing on its DNA to another generation. Number 4, growth and development. All living things grow and they develop over the course of their lifetimes. They follow specific instructions that are encoded in their genes inside of their DNA. Number 5 is regulation. Regulation, regulation. Living things they have to have multiple regulatory mechanisms so that they're coordinated, so that they can respond to stimuli, so that they can cope with some type of environmental stresses. Let's give an example of you. Your blood flow through your body is going to change. If you're laying down, your blood flow will be determined by how hard your heart is beating, whether or not your arteries are constricted or not. And when you stand up, your body will regulate your blood flow in order to respond to that new stimulus. Number 6 is homeostasis. Homeostasis means that things have to be maintained in a steady state. You maintain a certain body temperature at a steady state, a certain blood pH, a certain blood sugar level. There are many examples that you can come up with too of things that maintain homeostasis. I don't know why I have the word example here. These are all examples. Maybe I was going to try to think of some more. One thing to note, though, is that homeostasis does not mean things always stay the same, right? When you were a baby, here's you as a baby. I'm going to draw you as a baby, okay? There you are. There's your little mouth and eyes, and you're in like a little blanket here. When you were a baby, you grew to be a fully grown adult. Here's you as an adult. Throughout this entire process, from baby to an adult, you maintained body homeostasis, even though your body was changing. You were able to maintain homeostasis. One thing to note here is that if you ever take, for example, a pathology class or a microbiology class, the word disease is the inability to maintain some homeostasis. That's what disease means. If you can't maintain some specific homeostasis, you could be considered diseased. Finally, all living things have the ability to process energy. They are able to use a source of energy for all of their metabolic activities. A tree captures light energy and turns it into chemical energy. A human eats breakfast and turns it into, and this should say makes into chemical energy. Oh no, I see. That's actually right. Takes in chemical energy. That's fine. Living things are also highly organized. In fact, well, non-living things can be highly organized as well. But when we talk about how living things relate to one another, it's helpful to kind of think about the levels of organization. So one thing that biology books will often do is start with something very small and work our way all the way up to the entire Earth. So we're going to start with something small, like an atom, which is the smallest amount of an element, and we're going to build to the entire planet to kind of help us to see how things are interrelated. So an atom is the smallest amount of an element. For example, the smallest amount of gold you can have is one atom of gold. The smallest amount of oxygen you can have is one atom of oxygen, etc. If we start putting atoms together, we can make a molecule. A molecule is at least two atoms held together by chemical bonds. We're going to talk a lot more about chemicals and chemical bonds and atoms in the next lecture, but here's an example of one. If we take two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom, we get H2O, which is water. That's a molecule. Macromolecules is a kind of a word that's specific to biology. In this case, macro means big, right? A macromolecule is a large molecule. Usually these are typically formed by the process of polymerization. Polymerization is when you make a large molecule by sticking together a bunch of small molecules. Kind of like how you can make a large train by sticking together a bunch of train cars. You can make a macromolecule, a large macromolecule, by sticking together many monomers. So for example, let's take carbohydrates. You can have simple carbohydrates like simple sugars. Let's just draw some simple sugars, right, just like this. But if we link them all together, we can have one big macromolecule. So here we have four examples of macromolecules: nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. And those are pretty important. In fact, in I think our third lecture, we're going to go through and describe the structures of each of these four. So it's a good thing to put this in your memory bank somewhere: nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. A more specific example might be a piece of DNA is considered a nucleic acid macromolecule. And if you click on this link, you can see, I think it goes to Wikipedia, you can see a picture of DNA in its three-dimensional glory. So if we start to put all of those macromolecules together, we can make organelles. So that's what we're going to put here for number 4, organ, O-R-G-A-N-E L-L-E, organelle. An organelle is a small structure that exists inside of cells. For example, a nucleus, or a mitochondria, or the endoplasmic reticulum, or the Golgi. We're going to look at these organelles in another lecture just a little bit further on. I think maybe lecture 4. We're going to look at specific examples of organelles and what they do. Sometimes they're surrounded by membranes. These listed here are kinds that are surrounded by sacs or membranes: mitochondria, chloroplast, endoplasmic reticulum, etc. Sometimes they're not surrounded by membranes: ribosomes, centrioles, flagella, cytoskeleton. we're going to make these distinctions much more clear when we get to lecture 4. If you put enough of these organelles together and they're the right organelles, we can make a cell. A cell is the smallest thing that has all of the 7 properties of life we listed above. So this is kind of the first thing that can be considered alive. And there are 2 major classifications of cells that you may have learned before: prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes have something called or they do not have something called a nucleus. They do not have membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus. They do have membrane-bound organelles. So all of these things here in our example above, this here, these are all found in eukaryotic cells, but they're not found in prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells can have these, however. These are found in both eukaryotes and prokaryotes. But again, we'll get to more of this later on in the semester. Number 6, if we get enough cells together, we can make a tissue. And these aren't obviously the same as the tissues you use to blow your nose. A tissue is a group of cells that carry out a similar or related function, and they're found in multicellular organisms. There are 4 types of tissue, and if you ever take anatomy or in physiology, you will learn the 4 types of tissue and learn how to recognize them. And they're listed for you here: muscle tissue, nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, and connective tissue. Organs, number 7, are made up of multiple types of tissues. For example, here you can see I wrote that the brain is an organ that consists of nervous tissue, but it also has connective tissue and epithelial tissue. Skin actually has all 4. It's got muscle, nervous, epithelial, and connective tissue. So multiple types of tissue make an organ. And if we get enough organs together, we can make an organ system. These are functionally related organs. So for example, the digestive system is made from the stomach. That's an organ. Small and large intestine organs, pancreas, liver, etc., etc., etc. And finally, we can get up to an entire organism. In this case, we're kind of referring to a multicellular organism, right? A tree, a person, etc. Unicellular organisms can be referred to as organisms too, but they're just usually called microorganisms. Number 10, the next one on our list. Now that we're at the organism level, if we put enough organisms together, we get a population. Let's see if I can fit that in here. P-O-P-U-L-A-T-I-O-N. Population. A population is all of the individuals of a species living in a specific area. So a group of wolves on a prairie, a group of pine trees in a forest, and a community is the sum of all of the populations. So all of the trees, flowers, insects, animals, and other populations inside of a forest makes a forest community. An ecosystem is all of the living things in a particular area and all the non-living parts of that environment as well. So here we're including even non-living things. So all the living things in a forest, plus the nitrogen in the soil, the rainwater, etc., that's the forest ecosystem. And finally, if we think the biggest we can here, we get to the biosphere, B-I-O-S-P-H-E-R-E. Sometimes this is also called the ecosphere. That's pretty much everything on Earth. Now, if we wanted to, we could keep going. We could talk about the solar system, and we could talk about the galaxy, etc. The reason that we don't do that here is because we're talking about biology, and so far, the only place we've been able to find life is on our planet. We haven't found evidence of life in other places. But maybe if we do that, biology would grow to encompass the entire universe. There's no reason why it can't. The last kind of thing that we're going to talk about then for this lecture is just the diversity of life. Biology is a very diverse science, and this is due to the fact that life itself is diverse. And that diversity is because of evolution. Now here I have a definition for evolution. I have the change in inherited characteristics that occurs in living populations over successive generations. Basically it's saying how populations change over time. Um, and we're going to talk a lot more about evolution, but not until the very last lecture. Lecture number 13 will cover evolution. And the reason that we wait until then to cover evolution is because evolution and the ideas of evolution are built upon all of the things that we're going to learn this semester. So we're going to come back to this concept and look at it in detail a little bit later on. But if we want, we can actually see the evolution of various life forms summarized in what we call a phylogenetic tree. And on the next page here, you can see that phylogenetic tree right down here. It's a diagram that shows evolutionary relationships among species, how closely related things are. And what you'll notice is that this tree is made up of three major parts. We've got bacteria, which is down here. All bacteria are shown in this part of the tree. We've got something called archaea, which isn't something that's talked about very much, but they kind of look like bacteria. They're just a little bit different if we look at their DNA. And finally, we've got eukarya, which we've got here. Now, I used a slightly different phylogenetic tree than the one that's provided for us in our textbook. And the reason for that is because, oops, I didn't want to do that. The reason for that is because I don't like the way that our phylogenetic tree in our textbook looks like. If you notice, it's a much more boring tree. It still has the three major areas, but it always shows, a lot of phylogenetic trees show human as like the very top or the very upper right part of the tree, like it's supposed to, I don't know, signify humans are the culmination of all of the tree or whatever, but that's just not true. Evolution is as diverse as it can be, and humans aren't the end of evolution. We're just one aspect of evolution. We're one part of all of the living things that are found on the planet. Now, we can see here, looking at this phylogenetic tree, how things are related to one another. The closer they are to the branching point, the closer they're related. So we can see that something that's up here is going to be very different than something that's over here, even though they're both considered eukaryotes. But these guys that are right next to each other are probably pretty closely related. And the reason that we can tell that they're closely related is that we can actually look at their DNA and see how similar they are to one another, and we can derive their relationship based on that. So the last thing that we're going to point out about these three branches, or these three parts of the tree, is that they're called domains. And there's a few characteristics that I want you to know about each of these domains. The first, bacteria, which is right down here, is that it is made up of unicellular organisms. So all of these are single-celled organisms. And archaea, over here, are also unicellular organisms. Eukarya, however, are made up of both unicellular and multicellular organisms. And we're going to talk about the physical differences of these different domains in a future lecture. You'll also notice by looking at this that if we're to trace back the relationships far enough, we can see that there is one root living thing. All living things, if we trace them back far enough, have one common ancestor. And it's because of the process of evolution that all of the living things on this planet were created. So every living thing that's found on the planet actually has a single ancestor in common if you go back far enough. Now, you might have to go back a very long way in order to find that common ancestor, maybe something like 3.8 billion years. But there is evidence that shows that all living things have one common ancestor in common. And again, we'll talk more about that in Lecture 13. It might sound unbelievable, but we have scientific proofs and evidence that imply that there was one common ancestor. So that's it. That's the end of the first lecture. What I have here is just a lecture review of everything that we've done for this lecture. First, we talked about science as a collection of facts and the method to get the facts. We talked about what science can't do, like it can't make moral or aesthetic judgments. It can't talk about supernatural things, and it can't be applied. You can't tell you how to apply scientific knowledge. We talked about the real process of science. Remember, we had that kind of weird shaped device with testing right in the middle. Exploration, discovery, benefits and outcomes, community analysis and feedback, and testing in the middle. And I have a few particular points about testing that you should know. Scientific tests are direct or indirect, and that if you want to make a fair test, it has to have these 4 points. Then we moved on to the science of biology. We talked about living things, and we had the 7 properties of all living things. We talked about the levels of organization, starting from an atom and built all the way up to the entire planet. And then finally, we talked about the diversity of life, and we looked at the phylogenetic tree. I should note that all of the science stuff that was covered kind of in the first half here down to here was all gotten from this website. It wasn't actually gotten from our textbook, just because I thought this website did a better job. All of the rest of the stuff came from our textbook. The last thing that I want to do then, before I let you go, is if we go back to the very first page, take a look at these lecture goals and make sure that they make sense to you. Make sure that you can do all of these things that are listed in the lecture goals. And finally, what you need to do is go to the Lecture 1 study guide and fill out that study guide completely. That's worth extra credit. You can bring it in on the day that we take a quiz on this lecture, and you can get extra credit for it. Also, it's going to help you prepare for that quiz. If you do the entire study guide, and if you can answer all of the study guide questions without any prompting from someone else, if you can answer all of the study guide questions without looking at your lecture notes, you're going to be pretty prepared for any quiz that I could give you. Okay, so that's the end of Lecture 1.